Okay, 5b, and there's going to be a long back and forth. So the background from yesterday was that the Gemara derives from a verse, Min HaBakar, to teach you that you cannot bring up a treifa. An animal has a fatal wound, you cannot offer it as a sacrifice. To that, the Gemara says, I didn't need a verse for it. It's actually a kal v'chomer, that just like a blemished animal, which a regular person, you could slaughter it and eat it, and yet it's something which is prohibited to bring up as a sacrifice. A treifa, which is prohibited to a regular person, for sure should be prohibited. So that was the attempt to kal v'chomer. The Gemara went back and forth, and will continue to go back and forth, finding things that are going to be rejections of this kal v'chomer. So yeah, so I guess we'll go from Amar Rav, just starting off from where we left off yesterday, 2 lines up. So Amar Rav, so about halfway down, a little more than half an inch. Amar Rav, mishum de'ikal meimar minchas haomer tochiach. You can use the flour offering you bring on the second day of Pesach to permit the new crop, planting the new crop. That should prove to you that what? She'asur lahedyo. Look, it's prohibited for a commoner, and yet mutaris l'gvoa, but yet you can use it for the temple. So therefore, I see that just because something is prohibited for a person doesn't mean it should be prohibited for the temple, and therefore the kal v'chomer is rejected, and therefore you need a verse to teach you why a treifa cannot be brought. Says the Gemara, no, you cannot reject the kal v'chomer through such a way. Why? Ma'ala minchas omer shekein materes chadash b'shviyas. Shekein materes chadash. Sorry. A minchas omer is something which permits chadash. So as opposed to a treifa, doesn't permit anything. So therefore, it's unique. And since it's unique, you can't use it as a rejection to the kal v'chomer. Therefore, the kal v'chomer will still stand, and you don't need a verse. Says the Gemara, b'shviyas, so on the 7th year where you can't take the new crop and plant with it. So there, when you bring that sacrifice, it doesn't permit anything, and yet you see that that it doesn't permit anything. So it should still we should still use it as our kal v'chomer, and therefore you don't need a verse. Minchas omer was a rejection of the kal v'chomer. Then we rejected minchas omer. Now we're upholding minchas omer as a rejection of the kal v'chomer. So we say no. Even during Shemitah, it still permits certain things. Shviyas nami shekein materes tzvichim b'shviyas. Let's say you have things that you didn't plant; they were planted on their own. Who knows? Seeds fell down, got knocked off. Things grew on their own. You didn't plant them. So those are called tzvichim. So those things, it could permit the minchas omer, the flour offering brought on the second day of Pesach, could permit those. So that the Gemara says, well, we're going like Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, the Amar, svichin asurin. He holds that those things that are planted on their own are prohibited, and svichin asurin b'shviyas, and therefore, really, the minchas omer is something which we found a case where it doesn't permit anything, and therefore it would be a good rejection of the kal v'chomer, and therefore you would have thought that a treifa can be brought up as a sacrifice, to which we need a pasuk to tell you not that way. So Amar Ravacha bar Abba Rav Ashi, the Rabbi Akiva nami lifra. We can reject the kal v'chomer like this. Ma'ala minchas omer shekein materes chadash b'chutz la'aretz. At the end of the day, it's still unique, and you can't use it as a rejection of the kal v'chomer because it allows crop in America, meaning in exile, after the Eretz Yisrael, it permits those things in chutz la'aretz. Now, there's 2 opinions if the prohibition of chadash outside of Eretz Yisrael is biblical or not. So, even if you hold it's not biblical, but still, it's still coming to permit. At the end of the day, when you bring that flour offering on the second day of Pesach, it's still coming to permit its own negative prohibition. Meaning, once you bring it, so there's no longer a negative prohibition. to use the new crop. So then you can eat the leftovers. If you eat the leftovers of that flour offering, so let's say on Shvius, that Rabbi Kiva holds that it's prohibited to get benefit from these svichim, the things that grew on their own, but still, and therefore we're asking, what did the new crop come to permit? Because if it's a special thing that it's a permitter, so then we can't use it as a rebuttal of the Kal V'chomer because a treifa doesn't permit anything. So we're saying during Shvius, even though it's still prohibited because of Shvius, but you knocked away one of the prohibitions. It's no longer prohibited because of new consumption. So once again, when you bring the flour offering on Pesach, on the second day of Pesach, during a Shemitah year, even according to Rabbi Akiva that says that these svichim, the things that grow on their own, are prohibited. So therefore, we showed you that that's a situation where the flour offering doesn't permit anything. Once it doesn't permit anything, it's good to be used as a rejection of our Kal V'chomer, and therefore you would have thought that a treifa is needed. A treifa could be brought as a sacrifice, to which you need our pasuk ala bakar to teach you not that way. But says the Gemara, no, the flour offering is still unique, and therefore you can't use it as a rejection of the Kal V'chomer because it still permits the prohibition of eating from the new crop. Because even though it's Shemitah and you're not allowed to eat because of Shemitah, but before you brought the Korban Omer, you weren't able to eat for two reasons: Shemitah, and because it's Chadash, it's a new crop, and you haven't brought the sacrifice yet. Once you bring the new sacrifice, so therefore you would permit the negative violation of eating the new crop, or planting with the new crop, and all you have is the Shemitah violation. So, yeah. So therefore, you see that the Minchas HaOmer, this flour offering, is unique. Therefore, you cannot use it as a rebuttal of the Kal V'chomer. Therefore, our Kal V'chomer would still stand, and therefore we want to know, why do you have to have a verse to teach you that you can't offer a treifa as a sacrifice? An animal that has a fatal wound, it should be a simple Kal V'chomer from a Baal Mum, from a blemished animal. Okay. We're going to have a lot more attempts to try to refute this Kal V'chomer. Always to the bottom of the next page. Okay. If that's true, so treifa nami takriv v'tatir lav shebesocha. If this is true, so then maybe a treifa itself you should allow it to be brought, because once you would bring the treifa as a sacrifice, then there'd be no longer a negative prohibition to eat a treifa. You can't eat a treifa even if it's not a sacrifice. But if you were to bring it as a sacrifice, it should at least permit itself that you can eat the rest of that sacrifice. So that the Gemara says, okay, fine, rejected. This whole idea of trying to refute the Kal V'chomer from a flour offering brought on the second day of Pesach, the Minchas Omer, is rejected. Ella parachachi. You want to reject it, so reject it like this. Ella parachachi. Mala Minchas Omer shekei mitzvasa b'kach. You want to show me that this Minchas Omer, this flour offering brought to permit the new crop, is not a good way to refute the Kal V'chomer. So the better way to do it is like this. Just say Minchas Omer shekain mitzvasa b'kach. The Torah says that you should go and bring up this new crop as a sacrifice. But since the Torah itself commanded you to use the new crop for bringing a sacrifice, so you can't use that as a rebuttal of our Kal V'chomer. Okay. Reish Lakish Amar Mishum de Ikla Meimar Mipita Maktoris Yochiach She'asur Lahediyot U'Mutar L'Gvoa. Reish Lakish attempts to say that special Pita Maktoris that we say here every day and other shows on Shabbos, special Torah that's brought with all the different ingredients. So it's prohibited for a person, but it's permitted. Right now, we're assuming prohibited for a person to put together, but permitted for the temple. So it says in Gemara, what does that mean? Mipitum gavrahu. What do you mean? Who's making it? Who's making the incense? A person's making it. So Ella, what it means like this: it just means it's prohibited for a personal consumption, for personal use, to make these ingredients of the Torah for yourself. Prohibited. And yet it's permitted when it comes to making it for the temple. So a treifa should be the same thing. It should just because it's prohibited for a person, it can still be permitted for the temple, to which you need a verse. So it says the Gemara, no, you can't bring a rebuttal of the Kal V'chomer and therefore require a verse from Pitum HaKtoras. Why same as before. You can't bring a proof. The Torah says you should do this for Gvoa. So when it's a mitzvah to go and do this, so then that's already different. You can't use that as a rebuttal of the Kal V'chomer because it's unique and special, even though it's prohibited, but it's only permitted because the Torah says that it's permitted to do for the temple. Okay, let's try Shabbos. We should repeat our Kal V'chomer. Why? A regular person is not allowed to do any of the 39 prohibitions on Shabbos, but yet when it comes to the Beis HaMikdash, there are some that are allowed. They bring sacrifices on Shabbos. So you bring sacrifices. And that you can't do on a regular Shabbos if you're not in the Beis HaMikdash. You can't go slaughter and cook up an animal. So says no, but Shabbos is different. Why? Mala Shabbos shekein hutra mechala eitel hedyo the mila. Says no, but the Shabbos wouldn't be a good rebuttal of Kal V'chomer and therefore a necessity of a verse, because Shabbos itself is already more lenient because by bris milah we allow bris milah on Shabbos. So only because we allow bris milah on Shabbos, so it's more lenient, and therefore maybe you would allow. Therefore, you see it's more lenient, and therefore you can't bring it as a rebuttal of the Kal V'chomer. Says the Gemara, 1 second. Atu milah tzorech hedyahu milah mitzvahi. You're assuming that milah on Shabbos is for the person themselves. Milah is a mitzvah. Now it's interesting. I think they speak out by milah on Shabbos that the phrase they use is that it's a tikkun gavra, that it's actually a fixing up of the person. When he has a milah, he has his foreskin removed. But it's interesting how you contrast those two phrases. But either way, here we're saying primarily the milah is not for the person. What it means is it's not just like nowadays people use it. There are so many non-Jews get circumcision nowadays for medicinal purposes. That's not what the milah is for. The milah mitzvahi. Hashem says you do a milah. That's why. So that's not a good example. Ela mala Shabbos shekin mikaseh. Shabbos is a mitzvah on Shabbos to bring these sacrifices on Shabbos. So therefore, it's unique, and therefore you can't use it as a rebuttal of our Kal V'chomer. Ravada bar Abba Amar Mishum Nikla Meimar Kilayim Yochichu Shashun Hadu Matar Lekvoa. Kilayim, forbidden mixtures, wool and linen are things that are permitted for me and you to wear, permitted for the commoner, but part of the clothing of the Kohanim, his belt, is wool and linen. So yet you see something which is prohibited for a person, permitted for the temple. So through treifa, say the same thing. Treifa, prohibited for a person, let it be permitted for the temple. So says Gemara, well, malakilayim shekain hutra mechala eitel hedyo betzitzis. We know that if you have a linen garment, you could put wool tzitzis on. That's the whole beginning of Yevamos. It has a whole 3-4 pages there about the asay dochalos asay, that a positive mitzvah tzitzis pushes away a negative commandment of kilayim, forbidden mixtures. So you see it's already permitted for the person. Says the Gemara, no, but atu tzitzis tzorech hedyahu mitzvahi. Tzitzis, and not for the person. It's not to keep him warm and to keep him look good. That's not what it's for, because it's a mitzvah, and therefore Ella. Next page, Malik Kilayim shemitzvah sabakah. Kilayim in the temple of the Kohanim wear the Kilayim, their belt. So that's a mitzvah, and therefore if it's a mitzvah, it's categorically going to be different. Here's from to the Kohen or the regular person. I think by regular person, yeah. Regular. No, Rashi is talking about the Kohen. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Fine. Now Rav Shisha Brei Davidi tries. Amar Mishum Nikla Meimar L'Hadar Dina. Okay, so we had all these attempts to refute the Kal V'chomer from a blemished animal, which is permitted to a person and yet prohibited to the temple. A treifa, which is prohibited to a person, for sure should be prohibited to the temple. And if that's true, then you don't need a pasuk ala bakar to teach you that you can't bring a treifa because you have a Kal V'chomer from the Baal Mum. And we continue to try to reject the Kal V'chomer. says the Gemara, "V'teisi b'me'atzat." Do one of these where each one has something unique about it, and therefore you can't learn it from there, but they should have a common denominator, and you could learn from there. Important to always find the common denominator. Yeah. V'teisi b'matzat. What's the matzat? Malika shekain kiddusha. So we said that malika it itself is its sanctity is what prohibits it. It's only used for once you do malika. Now the sacrifice has a level of holiness. Chaylev v'dam yochichu. Chaylev, the forbidden fats and the blood, their sanctity is not what prohibits it. Mal chaylev v'dam shekain boyim mechlal heter. Okay, but chaylev and dam only apply to some animals and not to others. Only a behema, the chaylev, a domesticated animal is prohibited, not a wild animal. And yet malika toichiach, but malika is never permitted by regular case. So the chazar din lo rezek rezeh. That's not a shavah sheben shasur lehegyot l'mutar and l'gvol. But the common denominator is between malika, chaylev, and dam. These three things, they're all prohibited to a commoner. You do malika on an animal, you cannot eat it. You cannot eat forbidden fats, and you cannot eat blood. And yet, when it comes to the temple, they're permitted. So let's bring in treifa. Afani abi treifa. Afal pisha sur lehegyot, even though it's prohibited to a commoner, and therefore you would learn treifa from here, and therefore it would be permitted to bring a treifa as a sacrifice, to which you need a verse to say not that way. Says the Gemara, we're going to reject this mahatzad, this common denominator. These are all mitzvahs. The bird has to be brought as a sacrifice. Mitzvah is do malika. Forbidden fats, got to put it up on the altar. It's a mitzvah. So therefore, that's not a good place to learn. Let's bring a rebuttal from the whole premise of our whole Gemara. Where was your premise coming from? You wanted to say I have a kavachomer from a blemished animal, that just like a blemished animal can be eaten by a person and cannot be brought as a sacrifice. Therefore, treifa is more stringent. A person can't eat it; it for sure should not be able to be brought as a sacrifice. But that whole premise is flawed. Why? Balmum applies both. It's more stringent. It applies both by the makriven, the people who bring it, and kikraven, the ones that are brought, meaning a Kohen balmum and the animal balmum, both a blemished Kohen and a blemished animal, both can't do the service. You can't bring the animal as a sacrifice, and if he's blemished, then he can't do the service either. So you see, it's more stringent. So to that we're going to say, Yotze Dofen Yochiach. A Caesarean section will refute this difference. There, it doesn't make a Kohen as a C-section can still do the avoda, still serve in the Beis Hamikdash, even though and the craven can't. Yeah, and a sacrifice, which is a C-section, cannot be brought. And yet, what do you see? Mutter lehedyot. It's permitted for a person slaughter a C-section animal and eat it for yourself. It's fine. The asr ligvoa, and it's prohibited for the temple. So the fact that a balmum is the people that bring it are like the thing being brought, that's not a good stringency. Because a C-section is not like that and has the same thing, permitted for a person and prohibited for the temple. So if that makriven, kikraven, that people that bring it are like the animal itself, that's not a good difference. Okay. But the Gemara says, Ma liyotze dofen shekain eino kadosh v'bechora. Ma liyotze dofen shekain eino kadosh v'bechora. But a Caesarean section, it's eino kadosh v'bechora, the firstborn animal. That's this expression. At the end of this expression, there you go, Steve. At the end of this expression, that the firstborn animal has sanctity to it. That's not going to be that's not going to work if it's a C-section. So shekin eino kadosh v'bechora. To that we say balmum yochiach, a blemished animal will be a refutation of that. How? So each one has something. So the firstborn animal. So if it's a C-section, then it's not going to have holiness. If it's blemished, it will. So now the C-section has a leniency, I guess, that it's not going to have a sanctity if it's for the firstborn. A balmum has this idea of the people that bring the animal, the kohanim, are endowed for the service. So each one has a certain stringency that the other one doesn't have. So yote dop and yochiach, because it's a C-section kohen can still serve. The chazaradin, and the law goes back. Lo reizeh kireizeh, v'lo reizeh kireizeh. Hatzad hashava shebehan shemutarim lehedyot v'asurim legvo. They are permitted to a person and prohibited to be brought up as a sacrifice. So we can change it. Yeah, afani avi treifa. Let me bring in a treifa too. She'asur lehedyot, she'asur lehedyot, tehasur legvoa. It should be prohibited also to the Beis Hamikdash, and that was really our Kal V'chomer, to which we're wondering, why do you have to have a verse to teach you that? You can learn from this that a treifa is prohibited to be brought to the temple. On that, the Gemara says, no. That a C-section or a blemished animal, we don't find that it's has any permissibility, as opposed to a treifa, which we'll see what this means, has some permissibility. So, right, these animals that are brought as sacrifices, they're always prohibited. The C-section and the blemished animal. There's no sacrifice, so we think right now that they'll be permitted. Now, as opposed to a treifa, which there's some kind of animal that a treifa is permitted to be brought as a sacrifice, what case is that? What's the case of a treifa that has some kind of sacrifice and it's going to be permitted as a treifa? So it says the Gemara, Ilema Malika de Olas Ha'of Ligvoa. If you'll tell me that when you do the Malika process on a Olas Ha'of, the bird that's a fully consumed bird offering, and once you do the Malika, so now you render it a treifa. Now it's a treifa. If you're going to the world of the birds, well then, Baal Mum Nami Ba'ofos Ishturi. Hamas Zakers Behema, the Ain't Zakers Ba'ofos. Birds happen to have a special dispensation that there is no, if there's a blemish by a regular animal, you can't bring it as a sacrifice, but not by birds. So that's not a good example where you see a treifa is permitted, but a blemish is not, because a malika will render it a treifa, but a balmum is also permitted by the birds. That's not a good example. So ella malikas techatas ha'of lekohanim. When you do malika on a chatas, a bird chatas, a bird sin offering, so the kohanim can partake in some of that. Oh, so you see, malika was done to an animal, and now a kohen can eat it. But usually when you do malika on a regular animal, me and you can't eat it. Oh, we found a case where malika has this a special permissibility. Says the Gemara, that's not really how it works, because kohanim is shulchan gavoh chazachu. The fact that kohanim could eat the sacrifice, the phrase "always eat" always is they're eating from Hashem's table, meaning that it's a special allowance that they have to eat, so to speak, from Hashem's table. But it's not like Malika allows them to eat it. It really belongs to Hashem, and from His table, they're allowed to eat it. So, meaning once it's in Hashem's table, right? So now a Baal Mum, a blemished animal, can be brought. A bird offering can be a blemished animal. So that's also Hashem's domain. So Hashem's domain is both the blemished bird can be brought as a sacrifice, and this treifa, the malikad animal, a kohen can eat only from Hashem's table. So back to our starting point that the Kal V'chomer is good, and therefore we want to know, you can learn from a Baal Mum, and therefore we want to know, why do you have to have a verse? The Ella, one second. Yeah. 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 So meaning we should really be able to. So, sorry. So our rejection of the tzad shava is not a good rejection. The tzad shava, the commonality between the C-section and the balmum really stands, and therefore you would think, and therefore you would know that a treifa is already going to be prohibited. So why do you need a pasuk? Okay. The Ella Parachachi really reject it like this. Interesting. No, the C-section and a blemish is a visible. It's a visible blemish. A treifa is different. You can't see it's blemish. It's an internal wound. So therefore, the kal v'chomer would be you wouldn't be able to learn it out from a balmum. Therefore, you would need a verse to teach you that. Mishum hachi itzrich kra, and that's why you need a pasuk, because at the end of the day, you can't learn a kal v'chomer from the balmum because its blemish is visible, and therefore it cannot be brought as a sacrifice. But a treifa has a certain leniency that its blemish is internal, not external, and therefore you could bring it as a. Therefore, you would think that maybe it could be brought as a sacrifice, to which we say, no, it can't. Now, that's that. So, says the Gemara, though, you learn the treifa out from Vayikra, it's really from this verse in Yecheskel, that the verse there teaches you, we expound the verse to teach you, only things that are prohibited for a Yisrael, only things that are permitted for a Yisrael can be brought up as a sacrifice. So, yeah. So, the end of the Gemara says, "Mikol asher yavor tachas hashevet nafka pratla treifa." When you're with your animals, and the 10th one is going to be the holy one. So it says that from all the animals that come under your rod, excluding the treifa, she'ena overis, it's not going to go under your rod. Yeah, and the rationale that the word here, overis, has an implication that it's really going to live. It's going to pass by and live. The treifa is not considered an animal that can really pass by, pass through, since it's not going to survive. So now, says the Gemara, tzrichi, I need both of these verses to teach you that I cannot bring a treifa. Yeah, it sounds like this brisa has two verses, and we're saying why do you have both verses for this brisa to teach you that you cannot bring a treifa, because if you only had the first verse, so you would thought that only excludes a treifa that was never permitted. Similar to the prohibitions of orla, can't eat the tree for the first 2 years, and kilai karen, forbidden mixtures. If the animal had at one point permissibility, and now it's a treifa, maybe you'd have thought with this kasher, it would be good to be brought as a sacrifice. Any animal, only an animal that can pass through, that's considered living. This animal is not considered able to pass through. It's not considered a living animal. Because if you only had the second verse, you would have thought it's coming to teach you a case where it became a treifa, and then you sanctified it like meiser, similar to meiser, where it was why is it similar to meiser, where if it became, why is it similar to meiser? It comes to exclude a case of where it's meaning where it's a treifa, and then you sanctified it. Just like meiser, the 10th animal can't be a treifa, so too you can't bring it up as a sacrifice. But if you go the other way, if you first sanctified it and then it became a treifa, that at the time you sanctified it, it was good. So you'd have thought that even later, if it became a treifa, you could still bring it up. That's why you need that other verse, min habakar, our verse, min habakar, to teach you that a treifa cannot be brought up. So within these three verses together, we learn that a treifa cannot be brought up as a sacrifice. Okay. Next Mishnah. Echad minchas choteh. The echad Kollel Menachos. A minchas of a choteh, a mincha, a flower offering of a sin, a flower offering of a sinner. The echad Kollel Menachos, and then all flower offerings. We'll see why we singled that one out. The echad Kollel Menachos shekamtzon. That now we're gonna have a lot of invalidations. We had one invalidation. That was for the wrong intent. That was the first Mishnah. Continuing the theme of invalidations is shekamtzon zar. Let's say a non-Kohen did kmitza, or an onen, someone who lost one of his 7 immediate relatives and hasn't buried them yet, or a tul yom, he went to the mikveh, he's waiting for sunset, or mechutz b'gadim, he's lacking the priestly garments, or mechutz kippurim, or he's waiting to bring the sacrifice to become pure, like a mitzorah, zav, or shelo rachat yadav v'ragel, someone who didn't wash their hands and feet for doing the service, or in arel, someone who didn't have a bris milah. Or I think we mentioned at one point someone whose 2 brothers before him died from a bris milah, so he can't get a bris milah, because if you don't have a foreskin, just go do bris milah right now. Well, but he can't always do that. Fine. Tame, someone who's impure. Yoshev, someone who's sitting, or omer al gabe kalim, or if you're standing on something, but causes that interposition, causes a chatzitza between you and the floor of the temple. Al gabe kalim, you're standing on clothing, on vessels. Al gabe behema, on an animal. Al gabe ragli chavero, you're standing on your friend's feet. So don't mind him. Yeah, puzzle. All those are going to be invalid kmitzas. Now, if you do a kmitza while doing one of those things, that's going to be invalid. Kamatz b'smol, you did kmitza with your left hand instead of your right hand. So now, ben b'seira omer yachzer v'yachzor v'yikmotz b'yamin. So go back and put the flour back. V'yachzor, scoop it up again. V'yikmotz b'yamin, and now do it with your right hand. Okay, so that's ben b'seira. Sounds like, right, the first opinion disagrees with Ben Beser. We'll see more about that. Kamatz v'ala biyado tzror. Let's say you did kmitza and there's a pebble in there, or a gargar melach, or a little bit of salt, a grain of salt, gradual of salt. Oh, korat shalavona, or another fancy word, a little piece of incense, a little particle. Okay, good. A particle of lavona, of incense is there. That's all going to be puzzle. Because they said hakomet hayeser v'achaser puzzle. If you scoop up too much or too little, that's also going to be invalid. The ezehu hayeser. What does it mean too much? Shekamtu mi buretz. So Rashi, So Rashi says is that when you scoop it up, so you see it's coming out of the fingers over here. So, and what's too little? The chaser should come to berosh etzbosov. You just take from your fingertips, but you don't take from the palm of your hands. It's not filling up the palm of your hands. So, yeah. Okay. So if you take up a stone with it, so that area of the stone, or salt, or the incense, that's called incomplete. It has to fill up your hand. So if you have a stone there or any other particle, that doesn't fill up your hand, and therefore it's going to be invalid. Okay. Says the Gemara, what kind of phraseology is this? Why one who brings a flower sin offering, and one who brings all the flower offerings. Listening, Kollel Menachos, she comes in Daf Yomi. Just teach us that any offering, any flower that's brought with the following invalidations is not good. Why did you single out the flower sin offering? Says the Gemara, really, I don't need it. You're right. However, Rabbi Shimon, I need it for Rabbi Shimon. Why? The Tanya, Rabbi Shimon, Bedin, who should be Minchas Kota to the Shem Lavona, says Rabbi Shimon that really the sin offering should require the oil and the spices and the lavona. That he shouldn't get off scot-free and have to bring less if he sinned. That's a phrase that appears sometimes. A sinner can't be rewarded. So Okay, so why don't we make him do the full quota? Why? Interesting that the sacrifice should not be in mahudr, should not be beautiful. Ubedinhu, similarly, to the nisachim, the sin offering of someone who ate chalev should require a nisachim. Really, it's referring to any chatas. It's just So really, a chatos should require libation. Bring the page. Shelo yihei chote nistar. So it should require that. Why is he off scot free? We don't want the sacrifice to be even more beautiful. Because the Sachem adds a beauty to the sacrifice, and we don't want someone who's a sinner to have a beautiful sacrifice. So now, that's all Reb Shimon. So now, since Reb Shimon has this idea that the sacrifice should not be considered beautiful if it's coming from a sinner, so there, so you would have thought that even if someone invalid does it, it'll still be good. Interesting, comparing beauty to invalidation. You could have thought that they had nothing to do with each other. What is if one thing is beautifies a sacrifice, another thing he does sitting down, so who cares? However, you would have thought that just like he doesn't want it to be beautiful, so too, if someone who's invalid goes and does it, nami tiskasher, kamash malan. Kamash malan, that teaches you that according to Reb Shimon, someone who's invalid is still going to be an invalidation, and it's not going to have the same logic as not wanting a sinner to have a beautiful sacrifice. Fine. So if that's true, that the reason why we singled out a minchas chota was specifically to teach you that according to Reb Shimon, these invalidations are still invalidations. Now we're going to have a technical point. Look at Reb Shimon's phraseology. His phraseology in the Mishnah doesn't seem to align with this explanation. So I jumped. By all the sacrifice, when it talks about bringing a chatos, it says kol zvachim shekilu daman zarva onein. So why does it say all the sacrifices? It should say chatos chelev and then all the sacrifices. So you should say the same thing over there. Now you're saying over here, the lame of the Rebbe Shimon, it's trich. You should do the same thing, single out the chatos and say that I need it for Rebbe Shimon. Alma came the tanule kol, velokatani chutz, kulu mashma. So since I said kol hazvachim, all the sacrifices, and I didn't say chutz, I didn't say except for anything, I include all of them, even the sin offering, and yet Rabbi Shimon argues over there. So hachanami came the tanule kol. So I should say the same thing. I should just teach all sacrifices and not and now it include even the sin offering of a kohen. Says the Gemara, okay, you're right. The reason why I need this is because it's true. Our first Mishnah, where you have to have the right intent, and if you have the wrong intent, it's going to be invalid. That was not like Reb Shimon, according to 2 out of the 3 explanations that we gave, Rava, and Rabba. So you would have thought that this Mishnah, Sefer Nami, dilok Reb Shimon. Maybe this Mishnah is also not going to be like Reb Shimon. So Kamash Malon, that we taught you, Minchas Chota, we singled that one out to teach you that that Rabbi Shimon will even agree to our Mishnah. He disagrees with the first Mishnah, but he will agree with the second Mishnah. Yeah. Amar Rav Zar Shekamatz Yagzir. So it says that a non-Kohen that does Kmitza, so Rav says you got to go and do it again. Rav's against the Mishnah. But it says that it's invalid. That sounds like it's invalid and you cannot do it again. So it says the Gemara, no, really the two fit with each other. My puzzle, it's puzzle Yagzir. It's invalid until you go back and do it again. Until you put the flour back down and scoop it up again, it's invalid in its current state. If you put it down and pick it up again, then it's going to be good. Not you, the non-Kohen. If a Kohen goes and picks up it, it'll be good. If that's true, Hainu ben Beseira. If that's true, that means that the first opinion is in line with Ben Beseira. That was Ben Beseira said, Yagzer v'Yagzer v'Yikmutz b'Yamin. When it came to the left hand, Ben Beseira said, go back and do it again. It sounds like that we don't have in the first opinion of the Mishnah anybody who says you can go back and do it again. But according to Rav, who's telling us that if a non-Kohen does it, you can go and do it again, that sounds like Ben Beseira. So, either Isi Lekomets Be'ein Elo Pligi Rabbanan Allah, the Ben Beseira. Keep Pligi the Chaser Komets. Rabbanan Savri Lo Yavi Mitoch Beso V'Malenu. Ben Beseira Savri Yavi Mitoch Beso V'Malenu. So, the Rabbanan, if the flower is right here, so then they don't argue on Ben Beseira. Put it down and do it again. They argue when the flower is not here and you have to go back to your house and refill and get more flour for your house. The Rabbanan hold Lo Yavi Mitoch Beso. Don't go back to your house and fill it up. And then Beseira will say you could go back to your house and fill it up with flour, because the Rabbanan say once it went into a vessel, then it already had a level of sanctity, and now it's invalid because it was improperly sanctified. Then Beseira says no, even if it was put into a vessel, because you can still go back home and do a refill. If that's true, now here comes the technical point. Then Beseira Omer Yagzer v'Yagzer v'Yikmutz b'Yamin. So it says Yagzer v'Yikmutz b'Yamin. Then Beseira Omer Yagzer v'Yavim mitoch Beso v'Malenu v'Yagzer v'Yikmutz b'Yamin v'Bayilei. When Ben Beseira said you should refill it, it sounds like you just refill it right here and there. Sorry, right here on the spot. If you meant to say you should go to your house and refill, then he should say that. It sounds like they argue about if it's right here. Can you put it down and refill it? Yes or no? To that, Ben Beseira says you could, and the Tanakama says you cannot. So to that we say Kikama Rav le Ben Beseira. Really, Rav's whole statement was all for Ben Beseira and not for the Rabbanan. So says the Gemara Pshita. That's obvious. What would you have thought? You'd have thought Ben Beseira is only talking about the left hand, but not about anything else. Of al b'shar psulim lo, Kamashmal and Rav tells you that even the non-Kohen scoops up the flour, and even though it's a not Kohen, you could put it down and have a Kohen get up and scoop it up. Now, why would we single out a left hand as opposed to all things, all the invalidations? Ma'ishna small Eshkala Hekshir B'Yom Kippurim. By Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol carries at one point things with his left hand. You'd have thought that that's something which is valid. So maybe we found that it was valid. So therefore, the Tanakama says that no, it's invalid. So Zarnami Eshkan Lo Hekshir B'Shchita. A non-Kohen also, he can do shchita. He's bound to do shchita. But yeah, we don't single that one out. No, shchita lavavodahi. It's more of a preparatory state, and it's not one of the services. Okay, we'll stop there.